You're entering the MSP Zone, a podcast for the managed services community, covering news, analysis, and interviews from around the globe. Elevate your MSP game by staying in the MSP Zone. And now, your host, Charles Weaver.
All right. John Burgess, live from Little Rock, Arkansas, from the cybersecurity epicenter of mainstream technologies. For those of you who don't know, John and Mainstream, they're a 20-year-old managed service provider, 10-year plus cyber verify, MSP verify, and John, the slapper of the bass and keeper of the keys at Mainstream. Welcome to the MSP Zone.
Yeah. Hello, Charles. Glad to be here.
Did I get 20 years? You've been around for at least 20 years, not you, but the company.
Yeah, Mainstream's been around. We'll this month, in fact, 2 weeks, we'll be celebrating our 27th anniversary. You know, we started as a contract software development house, but we've been doing managed services now for 20 years.
Amazing. You guys do great work. You have a lot of very happy customers. I would like to talk to you about a lot of different topics, but all centered around the theme of compliance, but what you as an MSP, and I would, my words, not yours, I think you're doing some fairly maybe advanced or progressive work, however you want to call it, but you're near the cutting edge of MSPs who are out there, not just doing managed services work, but actually going a little bit beyond where the pack is, and doing stuff related to helping your customer, your managed services customer, because I recognize you also have a large development, app dev community of customers. But you're fairly involved. Would you mind just maybe talking to us a little bit about what, in general, Mainstream is doing in the realm of compliance these days?
So you mentioned, we actually got our first MSP Verify certification in 2011. We've been doing that 12 years now, and that's kind of where our compliance journey started. Was, our story was that we had a software client actually that we provided hosting and managed services for, who dealt with a lot of publicly traded companies. Excuse me, and their companies were insisting, back then that their suppliers needed to be SAS 70 audited, which that rolled downhill into us as the hoster and MSP for our client. So that's what started us on the compliance journey. Is we had to become compliant with back then SAS 70, which has evolved into SSAE 16, and now SOC 2 as it's commonly referred to. So we've kind of been in this compliance mindset, and what we noticed is that those clients that were under the purview of some regulatory regime had special needs, but they were also by and large aware that those special needs carried special costs and increased cost. And due to the rigor that they had to go through to find a provider that could meet those requirements and comply with those requirements, they end up being very sticky, because once they found somebody that can walk the walk, it's very hard. It's a very risky move for them to move providers. So
to move away from you, there's risk.
Yes. Yeah. So what we've seen over those years is that kind of SOC 2 SAS 70 kind of beachhead that we established. All of a sudden that turned into we could knowledgeably talk to clients that were handling credit cards, so PCI compliance, HIPAA compliant. HIPAA came on the scene about the same time, 2010. So that became a big deal, and that's just evolved over the years. And as those regulations have kind of crept into other industry verticals, and they're all very evolutionary. So what we've tracked over the years is we had clients that had special needs, and by and large, those special needs had a high degree of overlap. They there's not a ton of difference between a SOC 2 client and a HIPAA client. They have their different terminologies, but if you look at the control sets, they're all about 85 to 90% similar. So what we developed a core competency for is how to evaluate these regulatory frameworks and how to adapt our processes and our tools, our solution set to comply with those. And so now that we offer, that's evolved our product offering. So we have our core managed services offering, but 5 years ago, we officially stood up an MSSP practice, and we offer compliance management as a service to our clients. So if you have your organization has a special regulatory need, then we're able to come in, help advise you, starting at the governance level, what policies and what procedures and what controls you need to have in place to comply with your requirements, and then how do we deploy solutions to implement those controls and keep you compliant.
So your journey starts as an MSP getting audited yourself to satisfy a customer. And from that standpoint, you start to become more familiar with audit terminology. You use terms like controls, right? Not every MSP may live and be comfortable in talking about audit controls or control frameworks, but you started to get immersed in that. Did that give you the confidence to spin up your MSSP practice? Which I'm just curious, you're not only doing compliance there, you're doing other managed security services in that
Correct.
practice,
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And what you and I have talked about this before is this concept that we very much embraced a culture of security, and that starts at the top. It starts with management and your governance board. Their awareness of cybersecurity as a real business driver and a business risk, and becoming knowledgeable, and then implementing a top-down commitment across the organization to be secure and compliant. They're two different things, very much. But we started very much talking about controls and kind of like you said, understanding the way the auditors, whichever regulatory framework we were talking about, assessors, examiners, auditors, they carry many different names, but trying to understand their language. And then what we also ran into is that a lot of our clients couldn't speak that language. The auditors came in and they're very much viewed as not nefarious, but they're very much adversarial, and they're speaking a language we don't understand. So we kind of saw it as a real value added service we could provide to help translate. It's like, okay, when they say this is what this means, and this is what you need to do to make this easier or comply with this.
So really interesting. And John, I'm going to follow up with a question. Not only are you able to translate and act as a translator, which by the way is a very sensitive role to play. That's not easy to play and much less just as a translator's role, which you don't have that. You go beyond that to say, I'm not just the translator, but I'm going to actually help you remediate some things. Is that an overstatement to say that Mainstream actually, when it translated compliance requests from the audit community, that you were also having discussions of, look, you have gaps here. Mainstream can help fix those gaps. Is that an overstretch to say that?
No, not at all.
Happen?
That's absolutely. We'll kind of our SOP is that typically we engage initially to do an assessment, a gap analysis as you would, and absolutely the deliverables from that assessment are, here's how you scored, or here's how we think you would score, and here are the gaps, and then that comes along with a proposal for how Mainstream can help you close those gaps.
Yeah, I think that's I think that that's the wave of the future. And when I hear of all these, a mutual friend of ours who used to be in the federal government, who shall remain nameless. I hate dropping his name because I don't know if he wants this to. But you and I know who he is.
Besmirched.
Yeah. He always talks about the need for MSPs to be out there more and doing more in terms of cybersecurity, and the risks are all around us. And I think that more MSPs need to follow the mainstream path of being out there, not just doing the fundamentals, the blocking and tackling of, hey, put up antivirus, or ripping out antivirus and moving to EDR or MDR or something like that, which every MSP is, I think that's table stakes now. But you have to go beyond that and actually interact with the customer and get them to start changing their business behavior. And I think that that's what your compliance MSSP practice, at least when I hear you talking about it, you're actually having the same conversation the MSPs used to have 20 years ago about converting IT to be enabling of the business, whatever business objective. Now you're doing the same thing, except on a different level. Maybe I'm overstating it, but
we in the MSP community, we always talk about how, kind of the shining city on the hill there is for us to be the trusted advisor, that strategic partner to our clients. And as this whole cybersecurity and compliance kind of world has come upon us, that seemed to us as just a very natural way to get ourselves into that position. You've got this new, evolving, very dynamic business risk. It's not a technology risk; it's a business risk. And we're already in the position of being their trusted technology advisor. And it seemed like a very incremental and not difficult shift to get ourselves in the seat of being that trusted risk advisor regarding cybersecurity and compliance.
Yeah. I want to shift a little bit to our favorite topic of the DIB, the Defense Industrial Base, as it is known in short, the United States Military Department of Defense, DoD community, which is doing a very good job of getting the word out about how they want to shore up and secure the defense industrial community, which I think is an admirable outcome and goal. I think there was a defense contractor that just got hit pretty badly recently, which shall not be named, but Google it and you can see it. I think just talking about it and doing more is always good. There have been some unintended consequences that you and I have talked about over the last couple of years, and I'd like to get your take on it. As you are doing more and more work in your compliance practice under your MSSP side of the house, you're undoubtedly coming up against CMMC, the yes. DoD NIST standard, and there's a growing community of what I'll call suppliers and purveyors of stuff in that realm. What are you seeing as an MSP out in the street when it comes to, I'm going to start the question with what good things are you hearing coming out? Like I would consider the education and the just general awareness. We're in October, cybersecurity awareness, right? The CMMC community seems to be doing a lot of really good education awareness. Agree? Disagree?
I agree. I think, we've been, you and I have been talking about CMMC for at least a couple of years now. And from those initial conversations, when, our first conversations were, hey, what have you heard about this CMMC thing, and having to Google what CMMC meant, that very much an increased awareness amongst the members, certainly the DIB community here in Arkansas, just a growing awareness of what it is, that it's coming, that it continues to be kind of a looming like thundercloud out there that sometimes it gets a little closer, sometimes it seems to back off a little bit, but certainly, yeah, that they have done a good job of getting the word out that this is coming as it's also continuing to evolve.
But it's creating conversations for mainstream.
Absolutely.
Okay, which is good. I mean, look, having customers talk to their MSP about cybersecurity is not a bad thing at all. I would like to ask you, because I've heard some things that I think are, I don't think nefarious, but I think that they're incorrect and harmful when uncorrected. And I'll say things like what I've heard from, now granted, this is not from the NIST officials, right? So these are people who are, they're not MSPs either. So they're people who automatically, I don't know by reputation personally, and nor are they affiliated with the MSP community. But I'll give you an example. I heard one CMMC consultant tell me that the and this person certainly thought of themselves as a CMMC expert. I'll tell you that. They told me that their view of the CMMC community was that the MSPs were in a position where they are going to have to take the controls from their customers and do a better job, really reading between the lines and using my own language. The MSPs need to do a better job of taking the controls from their customers and making sure that those controls are faithfully met. And at that moment, I remember I pushed back and I said, other than, Raytheon and Northrop and all the major, the big prime players who all have massive internal IT departments and cybersecurity tools and budgets, the vast majority of the DIB probably wouldn't be able to figure out what a control is, much less list them. And so John, your response when I tell that, is that an overstatement to say that, your DIB customers at the lower levels are going to come to you fully equipped and aware of what their controls and control needs are?
No, they are not. And in fact, that's been our experience so far, is that they're being, that conversation with us normally starts, okay, here's this list of requirements from my client, the prime or certainly the upstream contractor, and I have no idea what to do here. I don't have policies, I don't have controls, and I probably don't have, in a lot of cases, they don't have an MSP even. So they might have some in-house IT support, but I think very quickly in the DIB, you get from the primes down to very small, machine shops and manufacturers who are, they're making parts. They are historically not focused on things like policies and controls.
Yeah.
So that conversation usually starts with them needing some consulting and some advice on, again, the translating what they've been handed into what practically can be done, what needs to be done.
And I'm not saying, for anyone out there listening and judging, I'm not saying that all MSPs are perfect. But what I am saying is that I think that there's this notion of the MSPs, I've been talking about this a lot in the last month or so, that, do MSPs raise risk or lower risk? And every time people who probably are espousing MSPs increasing risk, I ask them the challenging fundamental question. Well, if you believe that, let's remove all the MSPs from the equation. Imagine all MSPs are gone tomorrow. Did our risk suddenly plummet and become nothing? Of course not. In fact, it skyrockets because most organizations don't have their own functioning, capable internal IT department. Hence why MSPs are so critical.
Yep.
But I just, this notion that you guys as MSPs are to wait patiently for all the subprime, and for those of you who aren't aware, when John uses prime, he's not talking about Optimus Prime from the Transformers. He's the prime contractors, the prime defense players out there are, the theory is I look at it as a waterfall. The controls emanate down and drip down from those primes, and the supply chain going up to them, through them, to the DoD consumers is what is at issue. And I think that there's a lot of organizations that, but for their MSP relationship, assuming they have one, they'll never be able to figure out what controls they need. Well, and so I don't look, that's the way I look at it.
And in fact, I had a conversation last month at an aerospace industry event where a member of one of the primes came and talked to me, and this person was saying that, okay, their subcontractor, their supply chain involves 50,000 small companies, and he was describing the challenge in getting them to understand what CMMC was and how to track their compliance and how to educate his subs on what they were even asking them. So there's a big disconnect between the regulatory regime and the actual end contractor.
50,000, and these are not like massive organizations. I mean, a few of them might be, but most of them are, I'm assuming, fairly small organizations that may not even have a dominant presence in the DIB, meaning they're not solely or exclusively military contractors. Is that correct? Fair to say?
Yeah, there are, my assessment would be there's obviously several that are, kind of wholly in the DIB, and there are some that have some federal business, some DoD business that's alongside just some regular business,
Yeah. Well, I mean,
and I'd like to go back to what you asked about the MSPs needing to get better at taking controls from the clients. I think in the way the world is shifting, we would love to have clients that had controls and had that level of conversation, or have more of them, because typically that conversation is, that conversation starts with, okay, we need to institute these controls. Okay, well, here are the controls we're already doing internally, that we as the MSP are already doing, in Mainstream's case, as part of our MSP Verify. Here are the things that we're already doing on your behalf in your environment. This might be a starting point for a conversation there, but if you have, you as the client have your own expectations, then I see that as nothing but a positive conversation, because at least it's evidence that they are invested in their own security and compliance posture.
I tell you, I'm gonna take that clip, John, of what you just said of you as an MSP wish your customers had more controls. I think that's the overwhelming majority of MSPs on the planet, even outside the DIB, who would feel the same way. And I wish more people understood it. And I tell you, I'm going to do what we can to make sure that more people do, because the MSP can only do so much. They can only go so far with a reluctant customer who says, you know what, I hear what you're saying, but I'm just not going to pay to do that thing that protects me or makes me compliant for CMMC or whatever other framework. And right, I mean, you can't force them to do it. I suppose you could threaten to quit, but
there's, for the, however long you and I have known each other, and being around in the MSP community, that there's always been that vague kind of conflict of perceptions about what the client thinks you are doing for them and what that you were doing for them. And the assumption on the, in absence of any kind of definition, the client usually assumes that you're doing everything that they may have thought of or may think of in the future.
Sure.
For the agreed upon price. And, I always welcome these whenever a client starts talking about, policies and controls, because that defines that in very discrete terms, that defines the nature of our relationship and kind of chases all that ambiguity out of the conversation. So I think it's always positive for us, because, we're always kind of sitting there thinking that if we haven't had that conversation with you, then you assume that we're doing everything under the sun for you. And even though our contract clearly spells out what we're doing, but once they are once they are at that level of maturity and able to have that conversation, then that it just makes everything so much cleaner.
Well, I tell you, even if the contract says it, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think I know your attorney. Even if the contract says it, I think that your account reps, salespeople need to be also doing a good job of communicating why you as an MSP are not an insurance policy, right? You are not responsible for every bad decision that customer makes.
Yes.
There are like significant gaps of things that you don't cover because you can't. You're not an insurance policy. I would like to ask you, because I know there's a lot of people out there who are saying, well, if mainstream can do it, we should do it. We should be able to start moving towards where a mainstream is. Do you have any pointers for an MSP that maybe they're doing some EDR, some cybersecurity stuff, maybe some point cybersecurity stuff right now, but they're not fully into it, compliance? I'm not even going to say MSSP. I'm just going to say they haven't yet adopted, MSSP or not, compliance into their managed services practice. Where to start?
I would start with picking a control framework or a regulatory framework that makes sense for you, and invest in your own kind of internal. You don't have to get externally assessed or audited. That's going to have to come at some point. But pick a control framework that makes sense for your market, and start getting internally compliant with that. That's going to come with developing policies. It's going to come with instituting these controls, which are, we use the term all the time, but a control is just the thing you do to make sure that your procedures are being done in accordance with your policy. Yeah. So before you even have before you're even deciding a tool conversation, picking a target framework or frameworks will help point you at which tools you need, and kind of will lay out requirements for the tools you're going to select. There's a lot of soft costs in getting to this point, and mostly it's at the governance, and it's at the policy writing and the control management.
I like what you're saying about it's not a tool solution, meaning, which is not to say that if you're an MSP, you shouldn't be developing and having tools like EDR deployed internally and also deployed externally as a service. That's not what I think, John, you're talking about. But it sounds like you're, correct me, talking about it's a governance and a business change, attitude change in the MSP first that needs to start happening in order to tackle compliance.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
We want to make sure that we're eating our own dog food, and that we can walk the walk that we're talking whenever we're in one of these conversations with a client, because we're talking about real business risk here, and the stakes are increasingly high on making missteps, and the quality of the advice and the services that we provide to our clients.
But one final question or point, you've staked out CMMC certainly in the DIB. If you were to laterally move into, let's say, banking, U.S. banking, which is not NIST CMMC yet, and probably not for the foreseeable future, right? They're on a different kind of a framework or different sensibilities in terms of their compliance. Do you feel like mainstream would be able to more easily do that because you've already gone through one and familiarized yourself with one framework? Like other frameworks are new, but you understand the common tongue or the common phraseology and dialect. Does that make sense?
Yes, and that's why I would advise picking one and starting with it, and because, like I said at the first of the conversation, all these regulatory frameworks are 85 to 90% overlapped. So being comfortable with those concepts, and getting your processes and your governance in line with how to kind of manage the tempo and the evolution of these requirements set you up. You're not, again, you're 90% of the way there to the next one, and you're talking about incremental differences. And we always have conversations about what does our lowest common denominator need to be if we're going to satisfy this new framework versus the ones that we're already conversant in. So I think picking one and getting fluent in that first one really is the majority of the heavy lift in being prepared to take on the next one with confidence.
Well, I tell you, I think what you guys are doing at Mainstream is fantastic. Keep up the great work. Definitely come back and join us, because I'd love to keep just our pulse, and it seems like you have a really good pulse in the CMMC community, because I know you're in it, but you're not a I don't want to say this, you're not a devotee or a fanatic. Like, I see some out there that just, it's like the first thing they've ever breathed is CMMC, and that's all they know. And I'm not knocking it, but it's not the only standard out there. And there's a lot of MSPs who have risk exposure to a lot of other frameworks. And I think that it's good to be familiar with those other things. So I applaud what you guys are doing. Really fantastic.
Thank you much. And always happy to talk.
All right, folks. So if you're not already doing this, get your tools in order, start delivering security solutions, obviously, number one, but then start to become familiar with your customers, their frameworks, and what they're sensitive to, and start it and follow John's example. And I think that's a good path for MSPs to be going into the new year, 2024. Can't believe it. We're almost there. Shocking. John Burgess, CEO of Mainstream, thank you as always.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a like. Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast so you will get notified when future episodes are released. We will see you next time in the MSP Zone.